Hello and welcome to the Com Laude podcast. I'm Ashley Roberts, Com Laude's head of new TLD consultancy, and in today's podcast episode we'll be rounding up the recent ICANN82 meeting, which was held last week in Seattle, USA. My colleague Sophie Hay will begin with a report on the status of the next round of new gTLDs. Susan Payne will then focus on .brand developments from ICANN82, before handing back to Sophie to talk about the topic of domain name registration data accuracy. Lastly, Susan will summarise recent updates in the area of DNS abuse. So with that, I'll hand over to Sophie to kick things off on the next round of new gTLDs.
Thanks, Ash. After ICANN82, work for the next round is still on track for the application window to open in Q2 2026. In terms of interest in the next round, there are 44 organisations globally who are in the process of drafting their registry services provider evaluation. Any organisation who passes background checks and technical assessment and testing will be published on a list on ICANN's website in advance of the application window next year. The current window for registry services provider evaluation closes on the 20th of May 2025. However, registry services providers can also undergo evaluation during the general gTLD application window next year. For prospective gTLD applicants, the list of approved registry services providers can be used as a starting point to consider whether you wish to use a listed provider, build your own backend even, or look for another provider who will be applying in the Q2 2026 window. For the Applicant Support Program, which is targeted at underserved regions, there are 33 applications drafted or initiated. Of these, 2 have been submitted for review. Now this might sound low, but we are still in the first half of the window, with the window closing on 19th of November this year. It's also important to bear in mind that there is a limited eligibility criteria for the Applicant Support Program compared to the broader new gTLD program, which is open to essentially anyone. Finally, discussions and review of the base registry agreement for the next round also continued at ICANN82, with the plan still to have this finalised well before the opening of the next application window. The full applicant guidebook will be out for public comment at the end of May 2025. The component parts will have all been out for public comment previously in batches, but this will be the full guidebook to make sure that everything is consistent and cohesive. With that, I'll pass across to my colleague Susan Payne to talk about how .brands are being used in the current window.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Yes, so as has been usual in recent ICANN meetings, there was a session from the Brand Registry Group, which is a group of brand owners who have an interest in .brand TLDs. They meet regularly at ICANN meetings to discuss issues of concern, both for operators who acquired a .brand in the 2012 round and for those who may be interested in an application in 2026. It's become a regular feature for BRG members to present on their experiences as a .brand operator. In Seattle, we heard from Matt Crossman and Christina Bedor from Amazon Registry. In addition to open retail TLDs, Amazon also applied for a number of .brands in 2012, and the most active of these are .amazon and .aws. Matt and Christina talked of a number of the benefits of a .brand that they experience within Amazon, including from a branding and marketing perspective, including the value of being able to place specific products and services right next to the relevant Amazon brand, and the significant security and technical benefits that they encounter in having a level of control over the domain space, being able to eliminate some of the third-party dependencies, and to insulate services from attack. Matt and Christina also touched on some of the challenges they've encountered, including on how to get internal and external buy-in, and the need for ICANN's policies to be brand-friendly and responsive to the .brand business model. It was a really interesting session, and it's well worth a listen if a .brand in the next round is of interest to you. Now I'll pass back to Sophie, who will take us through some of the discussions on DNS accuracy.
Thanks, Susan. So the accuracy of domain name registration data, referred to as in shorthand as accuracy, was discussed extensively in Seattle. In the GATT communique, so the Government Advisory Committee's summary and output of their meeting, accuracy was included as an issue of importance. So this did not rise to the level of giving the ICANN board advice that they need to act on, but it was sort of a flag to say, we're paying very close attention to this, and this is something that matters to us. So specifically, the GAC is interested in more information and data on the current levels of compliance with the existing Registrar Accreditation Agreement obligations on accuracy. The GAC is also open to ideas on how to assess the effectiveness of current practices used to ensure that registration data is accurate. On the GNSO side, the GNSO Council decided to form a small team to review inputs they solicited from different groups in the GNSO and others in the broader ICANN community. The goal of the small team is to identify areas of alignment, information gaps, and opportunities for further work on accuracy. Underlying both the GNSO's work and the GAC's stress on the issue is the Informal Report, published in November 2024. The Informal Report was funded by ICANN and conducted by Core Labs, who have done a number of abuse reports over the last few years. While the Informal Report is focused on DNS abuse, one of the findings of the report was that there is a relationship between proactive registrant restrictions and a reduced likelihood of malicious domain name registrations in that space. However, the Informal Report also cautions that universal implementation of registration restrictions could encourage cybercriminals to resort to identity theft for fraudulent registrations or compromising legitimate websites. As with everything at ICANN, it comes back to looking for a middle path. With that, I'll pass back to my colleague Susan to talk more about the progress on DNS abuse.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Yes, I would say in recent times there's been a slightly reduced focus on DNS abuse following the registry and registrar contract amendments that were effected in April 2024. But in Seattle, this was firmly back on the agenda for many groups. Sessions ranged from updates on current activity and best practices to reviews of the impact of the contract amendments to discussions on next steps and future work on this issue. The contracted party outreach session has become a staple at ICANN meetings. In Seattle, the group presented 3 new or updated reporting documents and guidance. These were firstly the abuse reporting guide, which is to assist in identifying the type of abuse and who the responsible party for addressing that abuse is. Secondly, a reporting online harm flowchart, which is essentially a kind of visual guide to help with that exercise of identifying the type of abuse and where to direct it. And thirdly, a guide to an effective DNS abuse report. I think the key takeaway regarding an effective report remains the importance of including screenshots that will clearly demonstrate what the issue is. In particular with phishing, a registrar will need to see both evidence of impersonation and evidence of attempting to capture sensitive information before they will feel that they have sufficient actionable evidence in order to take action. Following on from that CPH outreach session, there was then an excellent practical working session, which was jointly organised by the contracted parties and the commercial stakeholder group. This session looked at real-life examples, anonymised examples from reporters, to which a panel of registrars gave feedback on whether this was the type of report they would action and some of the reasoning that they would apply in making that decision. While this session demonstrates that perspectives do not always align on what is a clear example of abuse, it was nevertheless really illuminating on some of those decisions and factors that registrars consider to be important. If you are in the habit of submitting abuse reports to registries and registrars, I'd strongly encourage listening to the recording, which was really informative. Another interesting session on abuse that again is well worth listening to was organised by the North American Regional At-Large Group, or NARALO, and they held a panel on DNS abuse and artificial intelligence. Speakers from Microsoft, Clean DNS, and the Portuguese government discussed general cybersecurity and AI interface and how that impacts DNS abuse. In a really informative and thought-provoking session, they explored the potential for AI, and particularly newer generative AI services, to be used both for good and evil in either preventing or promoting DNS abuse in a rapidly changing landscape. Finally, I'll just mention the resurgent debate on what are the next steps for addressing DNS abuse within the ICANN arena. As mentioned, when work began on the recent registry and registrar contract negotiations, it was noted that whilst there would need to be some time to kind of bed those in, it was not likely to be the end of the story, and there probably would need to be further work, potentially even targeted policy development. With the learnings coming from now having nearly a year of operating under the enhanced contractual obligations to mitigate abuse, and with various new data having been shared, the possibility of further work is being revisited. So during ICANN82, the GNSO Council has determined to take this forward by reconvening its small team on DNS abuse, who will review the issue and recommend some potential next steps. In particular, the small team is likely to consider the recent Infernal study that Sophie just mentioned. This was a study by researchers from ICANN's Office of Technology and the University of Grenoble, and it aimed to take a comprehensive assessment of the factors influencing malicious registrations. It did find, for example, that there seems to be some correlation between lower pricing and price discounts and increases in maliciously registered domains, and also, as Sophie mentioned, between registration restrictions and registrant validation and lower abusive registrations. In addition, the small team is likely to consider the more than 6 months now that we have of compliance activity on the new contract obligations to mitigate, and some related data such as that from the NetBeacon Institute, which does suggest that improvement in mitigation by registrars has occurred following the adoption of the contract changes, and particularly with triggers coming from 2 subsequent breach notices that the ICANN compliance team have issued in the last year or so. This then aligns with the strong encouragement that's been coming from governments, including in particular in their ICANN82 communique, to progress work on this issue. So with that, I will wrap up and pass back to Ashley for some final words.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast, you can do so through Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify.